And hello folks, we'll soon be starting Developers Let's Code, our series aimed at fairly new to AWS developers, wanting to learn about how to use AWS services. So targeted developers who care more about the coding and implementation side and a little bit less about the architecture. So we'll give a few minutes for people to join in. For those of you who have already watching me, please give me a shout out in chat. Hey Brad, it's good to have you back. It was good to see you on Stack Overflow the other day as well. So feel free to say hi in chat. We'll get going in just a few minutes. So for those of you who are not familiar with Let's Code, it's a show where we figure AWS is very popular. More and more people are coming to AWS, but AWS is getting more and more complex every day because, hey, there's more and more services out there. So this show is targeted at saying, hey, here's the real information you need to know in some of the core services. We only go for at most an hour and cover off topics that you really should know about as a developer. And Mr. Bob, good to have you around again. Mr. Bob is one of our CQ long-term viewers who I managed to meet in Seattle one time, which is fantastic. Of course, travel is less the case now. So say hi in chat if you're watching. But this week we are devoting ourselves to, I should apologize, our webpage is slightly out of order here. But today is about setting up your new AWS account in a secure manner. So security is very important when you create applications and services on AWS. And when you get a brand new account, it's not always obvious what you should do. So I'll take you through the steps that you should follow when you get a brand new AWS account and you want to set it up in a secure manner. And to help me do that, I have actually created a brand new AWS account. With not much in it, well, nothing really in it. If I pop over to the Identity Access Management Service, we can see that I, in fact, have no users, no groups. I've got some automatically created roles in there because I created it through AWS organizations, but that's a different topic. And I've got all of these security warnings appearing here. So lots of error messages here: delete root keys, add MF multi-factor authentication, create individual users, use groups, apply a policy. We'll be going through each of these to get you set up. Now, I'll give you a bit of a reference. If you are starting up on using AWS, there is a great article that we have available. I'll put a link to it here in chat. And this gives you a number of tips of things you should do, best practices to help you secure AWS. Creating a strong password for your resources, use a group email alias, enable multi-factor authentication, set up IAM groups and users, delete your account key. So we'll be going through all of that. So this article can serve as a good resource, a reference point for setting up and what we'll be doing today. Mr. Bob says, step 0, use a good password manager. He uses KeePass. Haven't heard of KeePass. KeePass is good. I use LastPass, which is a cloud-based authentication service. So the good tip these days when it comes to passwords is use a different password on every service. Use something to automatically generate a strong password, and therefore use a password manager to keep track of your passwords. Gone are the days of just making up simple passwords and using it at your... I remember one time I went to rent a videotape from a store and they asked for a 4-digit PIN, and before I knew it I gave them a PIN that I'd used somewhere else, and that was a really bad idea. So always use unique passwords wherever you go. But we're not just talking passwords today, we're talking about AWS account security. So let's kick it off. I should point out that I have actually logged in. I will re-log in here. I've logged in as my root user, and I should explain what we mean by a root user versus a normal IAM user. And so if I go and sign into the console, if you have been set up with an IAM user, you would normally log in first of all with your account ID, then your username, and then a password. And the reason for that is I could create a Mr. Bob user in my account. Somebody else could create a Mr. Bob user in their account. So the usernames are the same. To differentiate them, you need to use an account ID. However, when you create a brand new AWS account, you just provide us an email and you'll use that email to log in. So we call that the root user. So I've created a special root user here. I think it's this one here. It then comes up and says, what is the password? And I'm in. I've not yet set up multi-factor authentication. We'll take a look at that. Brad says 1Password is great. Generating key phrases is very good for passwords too. Excellent. So I've logged in as the root user. What is the root user? The root user owns the AWS account. So I can go into here and say, tell me about my account. And I am the godlike user in the account. I can do anything. I cannot be blocked from doing anything. It is therefore a very dangerous login to use. And in fact, it's so powerful, we normally recommend that you don't use it on a daily basis. And I'll be showing you what you should do to avoid it. So I've just had a question in the chat. Is this just about account creation? No, this is, let's say you've got a new AWS account. What are the things you should be doing to secure your AWS account? Everything ranging from creating IAM users, turning on CloudTrail, setting password policies, even SCP, service control policies. So we'll be looking at everything, but yeah, it's sort of an account level rather than coding level. So very important things you should do. So root user, very powerful. Don't use it on a daily basis because you could accidentally do things very wrong. So what we recommend is the first thing you should do with your root user is to add multi-factor authentication on that user. And in fact, I've just forgotten where I add multi-factor authentication. Let's go to my security credentials. That's probably it. So I normally use IAM, Identity and Access Management, to manage users. Root users have to be managed through this security credentials section. And it gives me things like the option to change my password. Very good, don't forget your password. We sometimes have situations at AWS where customers ring us up and go, the account was run by Bob and Bob's left the company, we don't know his password, could you please reset the master password for us? And we go, well, we don't know who you are. So one recommendation we do have is that you can configure your account, and it was actually up here in the account setting, rather than having an account set to a personal email, we recommend that you come in and you can change the email to point to a group email. So maybe it goes to your cloud admins. And that way, if somebody leaves the company and we send you an email saying, here is your new password, somebody else can also access that password. So tip number one, set it up with a group email rather than an individual email. If you're just one person developing on your own, it doesn't matter. But if you're in a company, that's a good tip to do. Recommendation number 2. Multi-factor authentication. So the idea with multi-factor authentication is just knowing a password is not enough. We want to have multiple factors to identify. And that's something you know, like the password, something you have, which might be a security token or your phone, and that's multiple factors. Sometimes it's fingerprint, like you use to log into computers these days. So I can go in here and say, I would like to activate multi-factor authentication, and it gives me a few choices. I can use a virtual MFA, I can use a hardware device. Let's jump to the documentation and see what that means. There are things called hardware key fobs, etc. Let's go and follow the purchase link and see what happens. Hey, it points to Amazon. What do you know? You may have seen devices like this, which have a seemingly random number that rotates every 30 seconds. That has a special code inside of it that you can synchronize up with AWS. But if you don't want to buy one of these devices, you can use your own phone. And I have actually installed a program called Google Authenticator. There's many different authentication services, and any of these follow the same standard. And the way you use it is you come in here and say, I would like a virtual MFA. It pops up a QR code, and frankly, you can also register this QR code. You should normally keep it private. I come in here and say, I would like to scan a barcode. So you can't quite see it, but it's coming up here and saying, please point to the barcode. So I point to the barcode, and it's given me a number. And if any of you have scanned this barcode too, you will get the same number on your phone. There is a hidden key inside of that. I come in and prove that I have got the code coming up on my machine. I enter 2 successive codes, and I sign it. Now you might say, hang on, if you could just take a copy of this code, doesn't that make it less secure? Yes, don't give it out to people, but also you must log in with a password and that code. So only someone who knows the password and has the code running on the device will be able to log into the account. Let's give that a go. If I sign out and I sign into the console, no, I'm not going to give you my password. How many of you out there have set up MFA on your root account? Let me know in chat if you've done that. Username, let's go. So I put in my password just like before. And what do you know, it comes up and says, please provide a code. Hello, David, do you use MFA? And if I go and do this thing, I've got a code number up here on my screen, which I can type in. Oops, just changed. Every 30 seconds it changes. And bang, I'm into my account. So MFA is really great. We sometimes hear horror stories of staff who leave a company and hop into the account and destroy things. You know, to err is human, to really stuff up requires a computer, but to really, really stuff up requires somebody with root credentials into your AWS account. So always protect it with an MFA, and people, when they leave the company, unless they've got that MFA, they can't log in again. So change your password. It all works out very nicely. So step one was use a group password. Step 2 was to attach multi-factor authentication. What's your take on using MFA on the computer and not rely on the cell phone? It's interesting. I haven't seen too many MFA things on a computer. I've seen lots of, they now have Wi-Fi devices and fingerprint devices and all that. I couldn't see one that, for example, goes in the web browser. That's a little bit insecure because if someone has access to your computer, they can use it. Follow your sense of security. Something on your mobile device could be stolen, your computer could be stolen. It's just one of several authentication methods. So follow whatever you think is the right authentication method. Oh, there's another thing in here that you may have seen when I went in with my security credentials. Getting some network errors out there, are we? Hopefully it will keep going. Sorry about that. There's another option in here which is key pairs. So key pairs, so a username password is used to log in to the management console. But if you're making API calls from a program or using the AWS CLI that we talked about last week, you have an access key and a secret key. The root user can be given an access key as shown on the screen here. We recommend that you do not use access keys for the root user. Again, they're too powerful. A, somebody might accidentally get them somehow and do bad things in your account, or B, you might accidentally do things using those root credentials that you did not mean, like deleting something you really don't want deleted. So what we recommend is deleting any access keys associated with the root user. And now I can only be the root by logging in to the console and using my multi-factor authentication. I've even heard of companies who get those physical multi-factor authentication keys, lock them in the safe, so that if you really have to log in as a root, it needs someone with permission to access a safe and retrieve the key, so it makes things a lot safer. Okay, I'll now jump to the Identity and Access Management Service. Mr. Bob says the CTO at my company had a root key on their machine and he didn't even know it. So he was the god of the account. And yeah, very dangerous if people don't realize the power that they have with their account. They might think they're in a test account and they're really in production. Oh look, I've got 2 green ticks. This is fantastic. I have deleted the root keys on my access keys on my root account, and I've activated MFA on my root account. So that's really good. Next, it's recommending that I create individual IAM users. So rather than logging in as a root user, you can log in as an IAM user. And I want to create an admin user, but what I might do is create a group. Sorry for those folks who had a networking error. So I can create an IAM group. An IAM group is a group of users. Any permissions you put on the IAM group automatically go to those users as well. So I might call this my admin group. Can I use a space? I can't use a space. my admin group, I will grant them administrator access. We'll have a look at what that is in a second. And my admin group is created. So far, nobody can use it. I've just granted permissions. Let's have a look at what the permissions are. I can show the policy. Very dangerous. This basically says, whoever has this permission can do any action on any resource. Sometimes you might want to give a little less permissions to people. And there is something here called a power user. And power user access is a little bit less. I'll attach this so I can show it to you. And this policy is basically saying whoever has this is allowed to do on any resource, they're allowed to do anything as long as it is not an IAM organizations or account action. So they can't create new users, they can't change the email associated with their account. It's everything except the managing of admin users. So sometimes you might want to do that permission instead of the admin access. I'll just go with administrator though. So I've created admin access. I can now go in and create a user. I might call it John Admin. My name is John. Hi, I'm John Rodenstein. I'm a developer advocate at AWS and happy to show you today. We're talking about what to do with your AWS account when you get a new AWS account, just to make it that little bit more secure. So I can come in here and say I would like console access, optionally programmatic access that would give me the access key, secret key. I can give it what the password that I would like to use. And I do not want to reset my password. So I'm creating an admin, John admin user. And I can add me to a group. And done. I now have a John admin login. Let's give it a try. Before I give it a try, I'd like to point out something here on the IAM dashboard. Here is my login to log into my account because somebody else might have a John admin user. And to separate that out from my John admin user, I have this URL that has the account number of the account I'm using. But that's a little bit hard to remember. So I can click this customize button. And customize allows me to say, let's code. Oh, it's already been taken. Let's code, John, let's code. So I now have a much more friendly URL that I can use to log into my account. So let's give it a go. I will sign out. I will use that magic URL with the John Let's Code, and it takes me to a login screen, and it has already filled in that John Let's Code account for me. So if you give users that URL, they can jump to here. They've always got the right account. I then say I want John admin, put in my password. Will it ask for an MFA? I attach the MFA to my root user, so it should not ask it for my IAM user, though I can attach an MFA to my IAM user. I'll also point out I logged in as that John-admin user. Sometimes it's not a good idea for your admin users to be using their admin permissions all the time, every day. And this is because they might accidentally do something. And a lot of problems happen in IT by mistake. So you might have your day-to-day user account where you're doing things, maybe in dev test type thing. And when you want to deploy things to production, you might switch to a different user, or you might switch to a different role. In the console here, we have the ability to say, I would like to switch to a different role. So maybe you have an admin user, an admin role. You switch to the admin role, do your super dangerous stuff, and then you come back to your normal user. So again, not good on a day-to-day basis to be using a user that has full admin permissions because something can accidentally happen. Okay, what else can we do in IAM? I should have more green ticks here now too. Oh, look at this. I've created groups. I've rotated my access keys. Well, I think I didn't generate an access key, so there's no old access keys here, so it's happy. It's now saying apply an IAM password policy. And this is an ability in AWS to say what complexity you want to apply to a password. So if I go in here and I can do things like set a minimum password length. I can, let's say, work it up to 8 characters. It's the standard. It should be some uppercase, should be some lowercase, should be a number. I find that making passwords too complex actually leads people to reuse old passwords, which is never a good idea. So you've also got this option to say, remember the last 5 passwords and don't allow people to reuse it. I heard a story one time of a student at a university who wanted to reuse their old password. And so what they did is they changed their password, in this case 5 times, and then changed back their original password, and it didn't work. It said, sorry, you can't use a previous password. So they wrote a program that generated 100 different passwords and then tried to go back to the password, and it didn't work. And they thought, wow, these people are keeping 100 passwords. I'll just create a new password. The truth was the academic who set up the computer system had taught the system that if somebody has a password that only lives for less than 1 day, then don't count that as one of the remembered passwords. So it was stopping somebody from generating those 100 passwords. So what do you think? Is password complexity good? Mr. Bob says, I recommend almost giving no permissions to the user, but to force you to assume a role. That's a very interesting concept. So I've seen many companies who set up roles. You are doing a deployment action. You are plugging in the power from your laptop. You are deploying code. You are creating users. And for each of these super powerful functions, they make people switch into an admin role. And what that means is rather than trying to remember which users have what permissions, you can simply apply the permissions to the role and say who can assume the role. And that can be much safer because there's only one place to put the permissions rather than multiple places. What else do we have here? Enable password expiration. So this is a thing that says, hey, after X days, please change the password. And this is an interesting option here as well. Password expiration requires administrator reset. So this does not let people change password. It's the administrator who has to do it. And you might have some company rules in place that require this. A little tip to give you. If you have an administrator account and you've turned on password expiration after X days, and you've turned on password expiration requires administrator, can you see the potential problem that might happen here? So if I'm the only admin and my password expires and it needs an admin to reset the password, you're in a bit of trouble. So you might want to have 2 admin users or don't use that combination of options requiring people to change their passwords. Mr. Bob says, some people have a dedicated AWS account for logins that have no resources and you assume a role in a different account. So that's a very interesting concept. I often see this with very sensitive information that you have in your AWS account. So let's say you have a bucket of HR information, human resources information, salaries and things that you don't want general people to get access to, like admins. If an admin can access everything, they can access that information. So what some people do is they put sensitive resources like that in a separate AWS account and then set up cross-account sharing rules to say only the people in the HR group can access things in that other account. And you have to set up permissions in both directions. So it's a great way to secure it. And Mr. Bob's suggestion there is have one account with just users and nothing in there, and everything they do has to be done through those account permissions. Again, a great model because you might have several different accounts. You might have a dev account, test account, production account, one set of users, and those users can then assume roles in those different accounts rather than having separate logins. That's a topic that I won't be covering today, whether you should have multiple AWS accounts, but often you'll have different accounts for dev, test, and prod. You might have different AWS accounts based on billing. So if a different department wants their bill completely separate to somebody else, you'll do that. It might be application by department. You can use multiple AWS accounts. Go ahead and do them. And you can use our thing called AWS Organizations, which allows you to create a hierarchy of accounts. And all the billing can roll up to the top if you wish. You can even set permissions at the top level that rolls down. So you can see the account I'm using at the moment is actually created in AWS Organizations, and there is a master account above it. So many different ways to configure your accounts for security, for billing, for whatever you wish. So let's go back to IAM and see if all my traffic lights are green. And very good. So I have done the recommended first steps to set up an IAM account. Another thing we would like you to do is to use CloudTrail. I'm going to oh no, we'll do it from here. We have a service called CloudTrail. Now CloudTrail is an audit log for all API requests that go into your AWS account. So every time somebody says, create me a user, launch me an instance, terminate an instance, attach permissions to a user, that is an API call made to AWS, and CloudTrail can record that. So we recommend the first thing you should do when you set things up is to create your CloudTrail. And this automatically, if you create it through the console, it will automatically create a multi-region trail. So anything happening in every region will get recorded. But companies can also create multi-account CloudTrail. So the CloudTrail for this account can be sent to a different account. You might have one central account for collecting all of those trails. So you have a central repository of your security. So I'll come in here and create a CloudTrail on everything. You can limit it and say, I just want S3 events or EC2 events. I'll let it automatically create a new bucket for me. And there is now a CloudTrail that is running. Now, there is nothing in my CloudTrail at the moment, so let's go off and do some things and see if we can generate some CloudTrail activity. I might go in and create another user. This might be my normal John user. I'll go and create the user. Any other tips you've got out there for creating secure AWS accounts, just let me know in chat. I love having these great ideas coming up. I might also go in, maybe S3. Let's create a bucket. I'm trying to generate activity for the CloudTrail log. It does take a few minutes for CloudTrail to come through. John, let's code bucket in the Sydney region. Excellent. And let's go to EC2. And maybe I'll create a key pair. Now, even though I'm using the console here to create events, John key pair, even though I'm using the console, it's actually making API calls, I won't say that, back to AWS, so it will be recorded in CloudTrail. Whether you do things in the console through the AWS command line interface or through programmatically through an SDK, it will be recorded in CloudTrail. Now that will take a few minutes to come through. So we might, that's really fast. Let's see. So it's come in and it said, I'm just going backwards in time, I had a login, I deleted an access key. The reason it's fast is CloudTrail is sort of turned on by default when you create a new AWS account, but it only maintains 7 days worth of activity. So straight away I could see the activity I did, but if you wish to retain those logs for security for a longer period, create your own CloudTrail log. So here I can see that every login attempt was there. I enabled multi-factor authentication. I created a group. Let's go into an event and see what it looks like. It's saying I created the admin group. Here's the unique name for it. And I've got lots of information in here. Let's throw that bigger. I have who created the group. I was logged in as the root user when I did it. So it's given me the root user. If I was logged in as an IAM user, it would give me that name there. The account number and the root, it's told me the event name was a create group in US East 1. IAM is a global service, so it defaults to US East 1 as the region, North Virginia. And I created the group, and it's also got things like the IP address that I use to access. So if you're tracking down a security event and funny things are happening, you might want to group it by IP address. Let's go back to the event history. I created the account alias, which was the let's code, and this one failed. Let's actually have a look at the event here that failed. And here it is. It came up with an error code. It said entity already exists exception. So even API requests that are rejected are recorded in here. And that's really good for things like people attempting to brute force log into your account. You will see failed logins. You can also take the output of these CloudTrail events and create alarms on them. For example, CloudWatch events has a rule set where you can say, when you see this event, trigger a Lambda function, send me a message in SNS, or you can configure CloudWatch to keep track of them and generate alarms. A tip from Mr. Bob. The best way to get a full picture of what's running in your account is to look at your bill. Yeah, a lot of people say, how do I get everything running? Some people say you can go to the resource groups and tag editor and have a look at resources that are tagged or not tagged. It doesn't have everything, but mostly people are worried about things that cost them money. You know, I created that key pair. Key pairs are free. You don't really care to know about that. But if you're interested in knowing what's going on in your account, you can just pop into the Billing Console, whole separate topic that we're not really covering today. But it will show you right here all of the services that are costing you money. I'll flip to my own AWS account and have a look at the Billing Console, and let's do that. Oh look, here's a role that I could flick to. My billing dashboard in my account, to give you an idea of the information it brings up. Here it gives me a summary of the accounts. I've got a lot of money in workspaces. I've been doing some video streaming activity on AWS Workspaces, so it clocked up a bit of money, but otherwise only about $20 of EC2. If you want to get some details, hop into the bill details, and it gives you all of the information broken down by region, which is really good. And since we're here, I should also point out that a good thing to do when you're setting up a new account maybe is to set up some budgets or a billing alarm. A budget allows you to say, I expect to spend $20 a month on EC2 or $2 a day on EC2. And budgets will keep track of how much you are spending on AWS and will give you advance warning. It might say, oh, you've spent 50%, you've spent 85%. And you can configure it to give you exactly what warnings you want based on cost, amount of usage, have I used my reserved instances or my savings plan. So I could come in here and say, yeah, my EC2 budget each month, I want to spend a maximum of $20 on EC2, and I can then break it down by instance type, by region, by service, etc. So it will then track and give you warnings of how much you've spent for those particular services. A billing alarm is done in a slightly different place. That is a feature of CloudWatch. Because CloudWatch takes care of alarms. And I can come in here and click billing. It will tell me, please go to the US East North Virginia region, because that's billing is handled in that region. Mr. Bob highly recommends you do so. And let's go and create a billing alarm. And you'll see here it has estimated charges. So this is in my personal account, not the new account we just created. So I can see how throughout the month the charges went up, and that's given me an idea of what my expenditure is. So I can come in here and say, hey, if the estimated charges, the monthly charges is what I just clicked on, or did I? I can't remember. Yes, this is my monthly charge. Estimated charges. Okay, my estimated charges for the month is what it is measuring on. I can say if it is greater than $50, then please send an email notification to an SNS topic, and you can have multiple people subscribe to that topic, or you can point to an existing topic. So if AWS expects the amount to go above a certain amount, we will send you an email, or if you set a forecast, we'll send you notices as each of those figures get higher and higher. So really great, set up a billing alarm. And by now, CloudTrail should have the newer events that I created in there. You can see the roles that I created. Oh, I'm in the wrong account. I'm in the wrong account. Flick back to my other account. I was wondering why so many things were being created and destroyed in there. So here we can see I created the, no, let's go to the all events, data events, inside events. Okay, they haven't, oh, they're creating the user in there, is there, creating the login profile, etc. Mr. Bob is saying, what do I think of the new navigation top bar? You can no longer drag icons into it. I didn't realize you couldn't drag icons. It used to be that you could drag things and put them up the top here. So, no, you can't. But you can star things. Oh, I like that. So I can put whatever I want in the corner there. That's really, really good. Consoles are updating all the time. So sometimes you'll find that our documentation is a little bit out of date. Yeah, you could drag icons up there. Oh, Access Analyzer. I wanted to show you this. This is really great. I will flick to my existing account. It might be working. And in IAM, there is a fairly recent service. It was introduced, I think, at reInvent last year, so this is less than a year old. And a lot of people say, hey, I'm a little confused about what potential access the users in my account might have. Somebody might accidentally have more permission than they should really have. And so Access Analyzer allows you to come in and create rules. So you can set a scope. Access Analyzer then looks for policies that grant permission outside what you might expect. And it's basically, I thought I'd turn this on. Settings. Let's turn this on in my normal account. Yeah, thank you very much. And what it does is it looks at all of the IAM users, IAM groups, IAM roles, and looks for anything with the right permissions. So it's not so important if people can read, how many EC2 instances am I running, but if they can turn off EC2 instances or create EC2 instances or remove data from S3, it can be quite important. So here what it's doing is it's coming through and going, I have found all of these IAM roles and IAM users, and they have access to your account that you might not want, and it will give me certain warnings. So if I click on this thing, it's saying that I have an IAM role that has access to my account, and it's saying, hey, is this intended access or is it not intended access? And I can say, I'm fine with that, you can put it away, but if something is a little bit funny that you're not used to, it can then send you warnings about the permissions you've been given. So an interesting feature there, interesting service, IAM Access Analyzer, to warn you about potentially too much account you've been given on IAM users, roles, groups. Not to be confused with S3, has one called S3 Access Analyzer. And the S3 Access Analyzer is designed to warn you about buckets that you might have public access that you do not expect. So I have a couple of buckets where I have intentionally granted public access on my existing account. It's warning me about that. And it also warns about buckets where you've granted third-party access to that. So really great way of doing an audit check on your S3 buckets. And one other thing I wanted to mention, which is relating to security in your AWS account. And that is something called service control policies. And a service control policy is a little bit of a difficult concept. So I've got a handy little diagram that might make it a bit easier to understand. I like pictures. So normally when you, I'll put this link in the chat, so you can follow along the diagrams yourself. And this is talking about different ways you can assign permissions on IAM entities. And normally you have something called a permissions boundary. And a permissions boundary is the ability to say to somebody, hey, you have a limited set of permissions. You can, you can create users, is the normal identity-based policy. But you can put an digital boundary there and you can say, you can create users as long as those users do not have permission to create users. So you're limiting the permissions that a user is allowed to assign to new entities that they create and to the resources they create. So you can say you could launch an EC2 instance, but it must be in this VPC. And it takes the combination of the permissions you have, the permissions the resource policy has, and things like S3, SQS, they have their own policies, and the permissions you're assigning. But I want to come down here to this concept called a service control policy. And a service control policy allows you to put permissions on an account as a whole. So you might create a account and you say you're not allowed to create any S3 buckets in this account because all of our security is centered on a different account. Or you might say you are not allowed to create Lambda functions in this account. So you can assign permissions to the account as a whole, and you can say what services they are allowed to use, or you can say they're allowed to use everything except these, or they can only use these particular services. So it's a way to set that at the account level through AWS organizations. At the organization level, you can put these policies on the sub-accounts and limit what they can do. So very good if you don't want certain people using certain services at all. Some of our services have different security certifications, so you might limit and say only those services that have the correct security certifications for our particular country are allowed to be used. Talking of countries, that reminds me of another thing I should talk about, and that is when you get a brand new AWS account, you have access to a number of regions. And here we are under the account details. So by default, when you get an AWS account, some regions are enabled and some regions are not enabled. All the traditional regions, which basically means anything prior to Hong Kong being introduced, are enabled by default. So you can access and create services in all of them. Any of the newer regions, Bahrain, Cape Town, Hong Kong, Milan, by default we do not enable. Why is this? This is because a lot of people spend a lot of time putting in place their security policies, and they say, hey, you're allowed to use this region, you're not allowed to use that region, you're allowed to use these services, and suddenly a new region appears and they've got to scramble and update all their policies to either include or exclude that region. So AWS now, whenever a new region is added, does not enable any of those regions by default. You as the root user must come in here and specifically enable a region. You can come in, I'm logged in as an IAM user, so I'm going to re-log in as my root user, and let's see if I can change some of the other settings. Not something you want your normal users to do, so it is limited to the root user. I'll need my MFA to do this. My MFA code was just rotating over 30 seconds, but systems typically let you take an old code or the new code because there can be a bit of time drift going in MFA codes. If you're interested in learning how MFA works, I highly recommend you have a look at the Wikipedia article on one-time passwords. One-time passwords. And it's quite fascinating how a shared secret is hashed, and a little bit of that hash is then shown in the MFA token. So not only is a one-way hash that's impossible to reverse, but it's only a portion of that hash. It also includes a number that rotates every 30 seconds. So really interesting read if you want to read up about one-time passwords. YubiKeys are supported. I'm sad it's not possible to have more than one MFA. I have had people ask about that. Sometimes you might have an MFA in your laptop, one of those little small YubiKeys that you want to touch, and sometimes you might be on your phone and you want to get access. And at the moment, it's true we only support one MFA. Our solution to that is we recommend you create a second admin account with a different MFA and give it the same permissions and log in using that different MFA. So terribly sorry. So if I go back to the regions here, I can enable or disable one of them, and I was hoping to be able to disable one of my existing regions, which I'm not too sure how to do it. Enable by default. Can you disable? Disable region. Managing regions. Enabling a region. If a region is disabled by default, you must enable it. Fantastic. Disabling a region. in the regions section next to the name, choose disable. So I'm not sure if you can disable one of the default regions. Not too sure. Oh, you'll also, some command line interfaces can tell you if regions are opt-in and whether you're opted in or not opted in. You can't use YubiKeys on the CLI. You can use YubiKeys on the CLI by using get session token. This is getting a bit distant. There is a security token service command called get session token. This is MFA for API calls. It should work. Get session token is a special command you can call which generates a temporary set of credentials based on your own credentials. And when you call get session token, you can also provide an MFA token as part of that. AWS CLI get session token. Let's just show that to you. And you can provide a token code in your get session token command. Let's see what it says. This is the value provided by the MFA. So if you are making an API call or a CLI call that requires MFA authentication, you actually have to call get session token to generate a temporary set of credentials. While you make this call, you pass in the MFA token. You then get back another set of credentials that can be used with the AWS CLI to make a call. So it's quite complex. Okay. One last thing I wanted to point out. Here's another handy article that might be good for you. I will put this in the chat. And recommendations for securing my AWS account. Safeguard your passwords and access keys. So we've spoken a lot about passwords today, how to make them complex, of course, keep them secure. Access keys have to be stored somewhere. Either if you're running AWS services on your own computer and talking to AWS, you'll need to store those. So there's a whole lot of recommendations around storing them in a credentials file. Never store your key, access key in your code itself. Limit root access to your accounts. So enable an IAM user. Don't use root access keys and use an MFA. That's what we did today. Audit IAM users frequently. So we turned on that CloudTrail auditing service so we could see what people are doing. There is also the Access Analyzer I showed you that shows who might have more permissions than you expect. CloudWatch also has an interesting service, if you watched CQ before this show, called Anomaly Detection. And you might be tracking certain metrics, and CloudWatch Anomaly Detection can tell you if something unusual is happening. For example, too many people are trying to log in. We have too many failed logins. It might be a sign that somebody is trying to brute force into your account. Turn on CloudWatch Billing alerts. Turn on CloudTrail. Enable Guard Duty. So Guard Duty is an interesting service that uses machine learning to control your account. Guard Duty. Intelligent threat detection. It checks three things. It looks at your CloudTrail event logs. So it can look for strange, anomalous things happening in CloudTrail. It can also look at your VPC flow logs, which are records of the traffic running in your VPC. So normally if two systems are talking to each other, that's fine. But Guard Duty is clever enough to recognize typical patterns, and if it sees an unusual pattern of network traffic, it can warn you, which is really neat. And DNS logs. If something happens to your DNS entries that seems a little bit unusual, such as somebody trying to put in an extra entry so they can masquerade as your domain name or trying to take over your domain name, Guard Duty can teach you as well. A little tip about Guard Duty. When you turn it on, it looks at historical information and comes up with alerts based on that. So don't turn on Guard Duty on a totally brand new account because it hasn't had a chance to see what is normal activity. So run your account for a period of time, have normal things happening, then turn on Guard Duty. It will look at the historical information and make its judgments based upon that historical information. And that covers off the recommendations for setting up your AWS account on your brand new AWS account. So, thank you for joining me today on Developers Let's Code. Next week, if you join us. We're starting to look at ways of launching simple application services on AWS. So next week we'll be looking at Lightsail and how you might, for example, launch WordPress on there. After that, we'll be looking at how you can create static websites using things like Amplify, and dynamic websites using Amplify as well. Elastic Beanstalk we won't be covering, but what I recommend is during those shows, ask about Elastic Beanstalk and how it compares with some of the services we are showing you. So thank you very much. I hope this has helped you. I'll put a link to this page. If you are not already subscribed to AWS, actually I've got a survey I would like you to fill in as well. If you are not already subscribed to us, then please put that in. And I have a survey I would like you to fill in to let us know, is this working well? Are you getting what you want out of these shows? Is it too technical? Is it too long? Is it too short? Give me a moment as I call this up. Because this show is really about helping you folks to understand how to use AWS, especially when you're coming in new. And here it is. Here it isn't. I can't find where it is. Yay. Here it is. Here is a QR code you can use. Any of you who snap your phone, I'll put a link in the chat for a moment. And let me get a URL as well. Please fill in, let us know what you think about the show. I'll put the QR code back up. Let us know what you think about the show, any feedback, any topics you would like to see out there as well. We've got about another month of things to go here before reInvent season kicks in. And we'd like to see if we continue the show into next year and what we should cover. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you online again next week. Cheers. Bye-bye.